Alright, so me and Julie did our project on attitudes towards rape, a comparative analysis of police, rapists, crisis counselors, and citizens.
So this study looked at patrol officer responses to rape, public perceptions on rape, and how citizens viewed rape, rapists' point of view of rape, which is kind of funny, crisis counselor overviews, as in how they dealt with people who have been raped, and how gender or race affects a person's viewpoint on rape. And then they made comparisons between the public patrol officers, crisis counselors, and rapists.
Alright, so in other, different, ones they looked at before they did this, the different studies, one of them looked at, how, media perceptions affect, how, much rape's discussed, in many popular magazines, rape is, almost seen in, every single one of them. It's kind of weird. And they also studied how rape was reported, and basically officers, patrol officers, really control they found they really control the main whether or not a rape's going to be investigated or not. And they also were talking about the different psychological care administered by medical personnel to rape victims, and then the different beliefs perpetuated by society, such as all women want to be raped, women falsely accuse innocent men of rape, and women provoke rape by their physical appearance. This has led a lot to the victimization of women. That's why they're calling into question why these beliefs are around in society still. And they also went more into depth, and they were discussing with different people attitudes towards rape and attitudes of groups from which victims, offenders, and or people likely to come into contact with rape are drawn from, that kind of thing. Alright, for sample size and location, they looked into 1,056 citizens. They looked into 254 patrol officers, 118 rape crisis counselors, and 10 rapists, for a total of 1,448 participants. Out of those, 528 were female and 528 were male. So they did half and half to try and make it the most unbiased that they could possibly obtain. And they did patrol officers from 2 urban and 2 rural areas, again to keep that variety going. And they chose their crisis counselors from 12 major metropolitan areas. This left 47% of the subjects being women, 53% were male, 14 were black, 86% were white, 33 years was the mean age for the people they chose, with an average of 15 years of education between all of them. Alright.
So a scree test is basically calculating the total amount of variables and variance between the factors that they used, and there are 8 factors that were present in the data. Factor 1 is principally defined by items dealing with a woman's responsibility in preventing rape. Factor 2 was dealing with sex in relation to rape. Factor 3 is dealing with the punishment of a rapist. Factor 4 reflects the perceived role of women in causing or precipitating rape. Factor 5 is defined by loadings of items dealing with the perceived normality of mental well-being of rapists. Factor 6 is more on the motivation of rape. Factor 7 is on the perceived attractiveness of a woman after her rape. And Factor 8 tends to deal with items that seem to reflect the expected behavior of a woman during rape. They calculated factor scores / factor reliability. They're basically the same thing. It's basically saying, okay, well, this data is reliable. So they calculated how reliable their data was, and the multiple stepwise correlations are basically just seeing how important other factors are, like seeing which variables are important and which ones are not, and taking out the ones that aren't, and then using the ones that are to create a linear graph. And then the summary of means is basically after the stepwise data is calculated, they're seeing how this factors into the data set as a whole. And there you go, that's the test conducted.
The results and conclusions of these tests were that in the scree test, the mean result was 0.87, which was dead in the middle of what they were testing. 5 factors were contributed to possibly characterize the high score, and 3 factors were impossible to derive a high score from. These factors were previously mentioned in the last slide. The lower bound of reliability had a mean of 0.62, and the men felt that it was a woman's responsibility to prevent rape as of a greater extent, which is kind of crappy. And then whites felt that women were primarily responsible for preventing rape as opposed to blacks. The rape attitudes were similar to that of sex of the respondent. So women were much more oh, that's not the woman's fault, that kind of thing, and men were it was kind of her responsibility to keep it from happening. 3 correlations found to be significant with rapists. Patrol officers' attitudes were less predictable than citizens, and so therefore some of them were they were very strongly opposed, and in fact the patrol officers' viewpoints tended to lean more towards a rapist viewpoint rather than the regular crisis hotlines for rape. The rape crisis counselors, found to have similar beliefs as officers in regards to the victims fighting back, but they were just different overall. The citizens seemed to lean more towards the rape crisis counselors.
Alright, so this is just the table on seeing on which factors were relevant to the attitudes towards rape. Again, the 8 factors are listed in here, except for they have expanded upon those 8 factors and made them more specific. So what you're going to see in these tables for the next 3 slides is basically a specified version of the 8 factors that they originally identified. The study specifically states that they didn't want to force the attitudes against rape or towards rape into just those 8 categories, because rape is a complex situation, and they just wanted to get the full outlook in their sample of attitudes. So there's this second part of the table. Again, it is starting to get more complex, and there's a lot of little complexities that they filtered into the table. And there's the last slide.
Alright, so in table 2, it was discussed that it was the table was on product moment correlation, stepwise, multiple correlations, and standard Bether weights between respondent characteristics and dimensions of rape attitudes. And essentially this was just discussing how the different characteristics of the respondents is going to affect their viewpoints towards the rape situation, that kind of thing. So they looked into the marital status of them, the years of education, their attitudes towards women, if they've personally been associated with anyone who has been raped, because that makes a very large difference. Just that kind of stuff. It was just a very more in-depth search into why they think the way they do, and why these opinions are affected, and that kind of thing.
Okay, and then this is the summary of means, which is basically the whole sum of raped attitudes in a table. So this is what the data found rape attitudes to be after surveying everybody in their study. So basically you're going to see the 8 factors here, and this time they're specified into the categories that were listed, and that's basically it for this one.
Okay, so the improvements for this, they found that there needed to be refinements in the content of the ATR, which could perhaps more clearly delineate the attitudes towards rape. Basically they found the 3 categories they were trying to stuff everything into just didn't have enough space for all of the actual contributions that go into why someone thinks the way they do about rape. They're just trying to put it way too small. And attitude should be more represented as a multi-dimensional construct, because there's just so many different pieces and parts that create someone's opinion. And further refinements to the ATR could be to improve the psychometric properties, that kind of thing. Alright, and that was our PowerPoint presentation on the attitudes towards rape, a comparative analysis of police, rapists, crisis counselors, and citizens. I hope you guys learned something through this.